Coming up on today's episode of Parasport Nation, Nathan and I debate more hot topic issues from the parasports world. All that and more to come. Let's get started.
Welcome to Parasport Nation with Alex Smyth and Nathan Clement.
Welcome into Parasport Nation. I'm Alex Smyth. As always, I am joined by my co-host Nathan Clement. Nathan, are you ready for another edition of a head-to-head debate with yours truly?
I'm ready for a 12-round bout. It's going to be a lot more interesting and a lot better than that Mike Tyson, Jake Paul fight, so I'm ready for it.
Ooh, those are some fighting words for sure. But before we get into the debate, let's have the PSN preview.
Now, the PSN update.
Pucks were getting in deep in Prince Edward Island as prelims concluded at the Para Hockey Cup 2024. Canada defeated China 7-1 in their second game before facing the U.S. to conclude the round robin. A second period surge by the U.S. was the difference as the States won 5-3 and placed first at the end of group play. Canada now battles Czechia in the semifinals while the Americans play China. The gold medal game will be broadcasted on TSN and RDS on Sunday, December 14th. The puck will drop at 3 p.m. Atlantic, 2 Eastern, and 11 a.m. Pacific. From the rink to the slopes, we go to Austria for World Cup action as Canada begins their international season. Kurt Otway placed second in the men's sitting Super G classification. With the busy weekend of racing to come for the Canucks, check back to Parasport Nation to see how Canada fared in Stanek and Brennan.
Nathan, a ton of excitement just brewing out in PEI. I mean, yes, it's the semifinal matchups first, Canada versus Czechia, but I think everyone has their eyes looking forward to the finals. Ideally, it's going to be Canada versus U.S. for the Para Ice Hockey Cup. Talk about a rivalry.
Oh, yeah. It's one of those things where you don't want to give the commentators curse right here, right now, talking about it before it actually happens. But pretty well, whenever Canada plays the U.S. in a lot of these tournaments, it's always going to be head-to-head and tight. And finally, for Canada to win the World Championship last season is huge. And even though in that round robin play, the U.S. snuck ahead of Canada here, and Czechia and China are two tough teams to go up against, but it's looking like we could get another Canada-U.S. Classic, which is going to be really exciting for broadcasters and everyone that's seeing. It's huge and amazing that it's being streamed and being displayed on TSN on an NFL Sunday.
Needless to say, this is a perfect transition point to get into our debate. Let's hear the first question.
What are the biggest rivalries in parasports?
Ooh, this is a good one to start off. And Nathan, I think I'm literally going to be building off of the PSN update. I say it is Canada versus the U.S. in para ice hockey. I think it is such an extension of the able-bodied game. Canada versus U.S. in hockey in general is such a hotly contested battle. It has extended onto the para ice side of things, especially since Canada has been coming up short for the last few years against the U.S. They finally broke through this past season. They're going to try to do it in the Para Ice Hockey Cup this weekend. I think it is one of the best and most consistent rivalries in parasport, not just because of the tight field, the ability and the skill level and the support these two countries have in this sport, because it is a pretty small field of teams that are really quite competitive, but you add in the context of everything else. You know, we're neighbors. We're competing constantly in the other sports that we play in. It's just a great extension to see that rivalry continue on in para sports. So Canada, U.S., ice hockey, para ice hockey, that is my vote for the best rivalry.
Yeah, it's hard to beat Canada, U.S., and para ice hockey. Like, I've had the privilege of getting to know so many members on the Canadian team, and I won't say names, but they've showed me what their backs look like after games and after matches, and it looks like Freddy Krueger did some work on them. It's fierce, it's intense. I'm going to stay in the Canada-U.S. realm of things, but I'm going to go Canada-U.S. in wheelchair rugby. Just that passion, just those head-to-head rivalries, especially when Canada was on top of that sport back in the early 2000s, even into the early 2010s, it just created so many opportunities, and famously displayed and shown in the documentary Murder Ball really stands out as a great encapsulation of what it means to have a Canada versus US head-to-head. But in so many sports, we have that Canadian blinder, we have that Canadian bias when it comes to picking these sports. But there's so many great deep rivalries in the parasport world. Like, for example, Spain and Portugal, the UK and France. You even got Australia and New Zealand when it comes to rugby. So you have these great rivalries everywhere, but it's hard to beat what that Canada-US rivalry has really done for the Paralympic movement, and really brought people in just because of the intensity, the ferocity, and just the passion that is displayed every time these two countries go head to head.
Okay, so a bit more of that bias regardless, but choosing different sports. I'm going to agree to disagree. Let's hear the next question.
Should you have to pay for subscriptions to watch parasports?
I don't think so. I think it's one of the things where with parasport, we're really trying to grow our opportunities, really grow our viewership. And I feel in a way it almost hurts us really developing and getting audiences in there. Now, I will kind of add in there, if there was a one kind of serve all broadcaster or one network that would, like an Olympic broadcasting service or the Paralympic broadcasting service, be able to have all the sports in there at once, from international, national, developmental, I might agree with it. But I think that that cost is a major hurdle, because although we live in Canada, there's so many other countries that want to be viewing this stuff, and it's very difficult to get past that wall. So I'm going to have to say there should be no paywall for parasports.
I'm going to disagree with you, Nathan. I think there should be, especially if they are set up to do so. The Para Ice Hockey Cup that's currently taking place, the finals being aired on TSN Plus, I think that's phenomenal for the sport. That means there's going to be more money going into these programs. They're going to help support these different para sports as they are continuing to grow, develop. The broadcasters are starting to treat the sports and the para sports as they would with any other sport. That is a positive thing to see and witness. That, in my mind, that is growth, that is progress. That said, I understand, especially when you're still dealing with something like the grassroots, that's a different story. But once you get to the national and international level of competitions, I have no problem seeking out and paying for those, because I am supporting those national teams and those national athletes, treating them like they deserve to be treated, like national athletes, regardless of a disability. So yes, we should be paying for it.
I think down the road, potentially yes, but I'm going to throw back to cycling for a second. Back in 2023 at the World Championships, BBC, the British Broadcasting Channel, showed pretty well everything, whether it was mountain bike, cyclocross, cycle ball, which is biking soccer in a way, but they also had paracycling, the track events, and the para road cycling events free. And that brought so many people in, so many viewers that didn't really know about it before. And there was no paywall. There was nothing to really have to block the viewers. And even at World Championships back in Zurich in September of 2024 in cycling, we had Eurovision broadcasting everything for free, and the amount of viewers that we got because of that was massive. But as soon as a paywall comes, at least at this moment, it's going to be very, very difficult, I think, for people to really know what's available or hear what's available. So I think it's that first step of blocking that kind of accessibility and that kind of viewership. So I say down the road potentially, but right now it is not needed.
Next question.
Does Canada do enough to fund national team athletes?
Ooh, okay, I'm going to take this first. Absolutely not. And I love the national level Paralympic structure. I have been able to work with them, been able to chat with a lot of people doing great work. I love the work that the NSOs are doing, but our athletes are not getting enough in terms of funding, in terms of compensation, to be able to follow their dreams as athletes and represent our country on a national and international stage. Yes, there's karting. Yes, athletes are being compensated and being funded so that they can train all year round, that they can go to these competitions. But when athletes are still struggling to be at or near the poverty level in terms of the actual financial supports that they do get, that is a concern. We need to look at not only if an athlete is choosing to go down this path to represent Canada, to bring glory back to our country and push our country forward on an international stage, they should be celebrated more. We've just seen some changes take place, especially on the para side, with improving the funding and the compensation for medals. Paris was the first set of games that saw equity in that to align it with the Olympic athletes. But the thing still needs to be recognized that Paralympic athletes with disabilities, they have added expenses. We both know the added cost of having a disability. I think that needs to be compensated and added into the cost of the karting and the sports that athletes get. Right now, it's not enough. I'd like to see it better.
Firstly, I'm going to say to be an athlete is a privilege, and to have the opportunity to race and compete in sport is a gift. And there's just to have a body that's able to compete, whether it's cycling, boccia, swimming, seven-a-side soccer, you name it. It's just an incredible opportunity to be able to represent our country and get to go around the world doing sport. But there is that cost side, as you're saying, Alex, and there's so much added in as a person with disability that regular audiences or people wouldn't really understand on a day-to-day basis. Like my bike cost me, if I had to pay for it, would be around $25,000. Fortunately, having my equipment loaned to me by my national sport organization. So I'm in a very lucky, privileged position in that way. But there's so many other athletes that go through team fees, that go through the cost of adapted equipment, like just the cost of a sit ski. That is massive just on an athlete. And to have ways of, there almost needs to be a system where athletes can get it funded and get it taken off as like a work expense or something like that, just to help get that burden off them, because sports can bankrupt athletes, and we've seen it happen before. And there's so many sad and difficult cases of, as you said, there's athletes who are below that poverty line, and it's a real challenge. But as you mentioned, there's some people who's doing great work. Like one person, Sanjay Malavia, and his foundation has really helped bring in medal earnings for athletes and just get us on that same page. But steps need to be taken every single day. And there's a lot that you and I agree with. I'm in a very lucky position as a cyclist having my gear given to me, but there's still a lot of work that needs to be done.
Well, and I also think, too, this also goes beyond just the monetary supports that you get as a national level athlete. I know in talking to some, things like having tuition paid for if you are on the team, you are looking for education. There are other, benefits, I guess you could call it, of being a part of a national team. There are other perks and services that are available to you that are not directly monetary, but still are involved in the compensation. So that's very important to remember. The improvements have been made. Yes, we can go a bit further than that. But next question.
Under 23 teams or prospect teams, like or dislike?
I am going to be the ultimate fence sitter here. There's bits of it I like. There's bits of it I despise. So with that being said, I think an international the highest of high levels, where you have a world championship, where you have a World Cup, where you have something of that caliber, to have a U23 team, to have a continental team is a disservice to the sport. I understand at a developmental level of having say Team Europe, or say a combined roster of different people from all around the world. I can see the benefit of that. But it's more of a trickier thing with parasport because there's a lot of developmental aspects to it as you're trying to grow a sport, as you're trying to get the sport there. But if it's at the international level, like I've seen in a few different places, I feel it hurts the sport movement more than it benefits it.
See, that's a very interesting approach to take on it because I view it helps, especially when you are in those early stages. I mean, we talked about um, the women's wheelchair rugby, where you had some of these teams that were kind of combination teams. This is a developmental type competition. Now, I know this isn't an under 23 or a prospects team that's competing, but it's those like kind of joint and amalgamated team together. I like the idea when you have these under 23 and prospect competitions and teams because it further pushes development of the athletes forward, especially when there's certain sports you don't really have a lot of a pathway to go from being a provincial level athlete to a national level athlete. I find those types of teams and structures in place are that happy medium in between those two programs. You can get people a bit more exposure if you're an athlete to something that is more akin to a national level competition or an international competition. You can really start to develop your skills even further. And if you're a younger athlete, it shows a pathway and a level of competition that other young athletes in this sport are going to be competing at. I understand the concern of pulling away resources, pulling away funding from the national program. That should still be the priority, especially at the national level. But I think there is a room to continue to push the movement forward. It's all about creating that strong pipeline from grassroots to club and region to provincial to national. So I think it is a key part of it. It shouldn't be everything, but it should definitely be a key part of it.
Yeah, it's a sport by sport basis at the end of the day. As you mentioned, there's some sports that they're definitely in those earliest stages of development and you kind of need it. But there's also another argument to it as well where we're getting to a point with some sports. And I know, for example, in the United Kingdom, you have a professional cerebral palsy or seven-a-side soccer league over there. And there's other European places that have teams that have rosters there. And you're really getting that growth. But on a North American sense, where we really only have the wheelchair basketball, like university programs that are really the big kind of leagues out over this way, or even like small little stuff with like wheelchair rugby here and there. But on that kind of international scene, I just think at a world championships or a World Cup to have team so-and-so hurts at the end of the day. But it's really one of those things where you just want to keep bringing eyes to it. And I agree with the more eyes on the sport and just the more opportunity, the more that people are going to access it. And with a lot of these sports, it's that progression, it's that growth, it's that development that's needed over time.
Yeah, I think there could be other avenues to really push up the development, but I see it is one that has been consistently used across different across different sports, regardless if it's you have a body or a parasport, that it has shown success in the past. But that said, I am open to other ways of kind of approaching the developmental side, the developmental pathways for athletes, especially in team environments, because this is really a team sport kind of focused question and situation. If it means, okay, you're going to have more camps, you're going to bring in more kind of developmental athletes or more prospects, maybe making these camps bigger, that you're allowing more athletes to attend to at least get that exposure, at least get that taste of what national level competition training and experience is like and what's needed to get to that level, I think could be key. Next question.
Should there be a minimum age requirement for competitions?
I'm a bit split on this one, Nathan. So when it comes to individual sports, I think absolutely not. I think if you are able to compete on an international level, if you are qualifying and you are competing and your times or your competition quality and level is that of a Paralympic level, you should be able to compete at the Paralympics regardless of your age. The caveat is when it comes to team competitions, I think there should be a minimum age just for player safety. That is purely why I would have an age requirement in it. No other reason other than player safety. I think you set it at maybe 14 as a minimum age for a team sport, but still that I think is quite generous to allow athletes to go on and compete. But when it comes to an individual sport, like a cycling, like a swimming, like an alpine skis, anything like that, anyone can do it as long as they are at the level that they're qualifying and they're going to be competing at that level. I'm happy to see them make the Paralympic and compete in the Paralympics.
I'm going to kind of go the opposite direction of you. I'm going to look more at an individual sport aspect where I sort of disagree with that. Now, in the case where if it's a head-to-head, everyone's going at the same time, I think there does need to be an age requirement. However, with that, if it's a solo on the course, like say, for example, in para-alpine skiing, that's fine, that's okay, or even like a time trial sense in cycling. But one of the major things too is, as someone at my age, 30 years old, if I'm going up against someone who's 14, 15, 16 years old, they're at that skill level, that's phenomenal, but they're still growing, they're still going through those developmental aspects of their age, and really comes down to what's their safety on the road. Are they going to be safe on the road? Are they going to understand and know what to expect coming into these corners? Because we see so many times in cycling and as well as some other sports where everyone's combined and everyone's close in that way. The younger ones are causing these crashes. The younger ones are causing these accidents. And in a sport like cycling, that can end up with you going to the hospital. And there's a lot of risk when it comes to that. But I do see with team sport, there's a little bit more room for it. Like if you have a kid who's 15, 16 years old, who's really bursting onto the scene, like you see it in professional soccer, but you also see it on the parasport side too, where you have these young up-and-comers. Like I'm from Vancouver, British Columbia, so I remember when Alphonso Davies was playing for the Vancouver Whitecaps, and he was on the pitch at 15, 16 years old, scoring goals, really being a difference maker. So there's a lot of room for athletes to develop, to really grow in more of a team sport environment, because you can be working with a lot of leaders, with a lot of other athletes, where if it's an individual sport, it can be a lot trickier and it can be a real big safety risk.
Now, do you think that is where coaching becomes more of the factor then, and more onus should be on the coaches to ensure that if their athletes are at a level that they can compete? Let's take cycling. You mentioned cycling. I think it's a great example. If they the athlete themselves are at the level that they are posting times that are comparable to other Paralympic athletes, do you think it should be on the coach to ensure that they're at the level to be safe and make sure that they're not endangering anyone else on the road, or is that comes down to the athlete?
I think it comes down to the coach and the structures in place by the governing bodies. Like for example, with cycling, it's very tricky to have like a set standard time every athlete needs to go or an average speed, just because every course is different, every layout is different, and every country does not have like the same resources. But there almost needs to be a certain like standardized way of, you have to follow these certain tests, almost like a classification in a way. If you're under a certain age grouping or age level, there should be like a road safety like test or requirement you have to go through, like kind of like a learn to race, learn to ride, learn to compete, that you have to pass, and you don't have to be like showing like any like red flags throughout there. It's kind of like a driver's lesson in a way, almost.
Make sure they're safe on the road regardless of what road they are on. Last question, let's hear it.
Best crowd sing-along song.
I'll take it. I think it is Mr. Brightside by far. There's nothing better than you're getting later into the game, the home team's up, and Mr. Brightside comes on the speakers, and as everyone's getting into the song, everyone's getting into the rhythm, all of a sudden, the DJ just cuts the music and the whole crowd sing it. The whole crowd is just in that environment. And it's one of those special things, like you see it in college football all the time. There's a couple schools that just blast Mr. Brightside. Like, I'm not a Michigan Wolverines fan, but when you see the big house, all 100,000 plus singing that, it is pretty phenomenal just to see that energy and see that vibe in that place.
It's funny because I think of so many different classic songs that you hear at arenas, at games and stadiums. The best ones are the ones where the crowds aren't really singing the words, they're singing to the beat. And so for me, I'm going with Seven Nation Army by the White Stripes. Again, they're not singing the lyrics. That's not the best part of the song. It's when you get that beat and you get the crowd all humming and chanting with the beat. It's catchy. Everybody knows it. It transcends language. In my mind, that is the best crowd song because within a few quick seconds, everybody knows the song. They're on board with it. They can repeat it. It's catchy, and it can't help but bring a smile to your face. At least for me, I always just have a smile whenever I hear that song come on at an arena or at a stadium. You get everyone else starting to get into it, and then it's just that momentum building throughout the entire stadium where you get more and more pockets of people chanting along with it. It also has a bit of diversity in the song itself in terms of the rhythm and the flow. It's not just one note consistently like some of the classic songs like the Ole Ole. It has more nuance to it. So that is why that is my favorite crowd song.
I'll toss you an olive branch there.
Okay.
I really think when Seven Nation Army comes out at a start of a match, at the start of the game, especially when they have it coming out at the World Cup and the whole crowd gets going, you know what's about to happen. And obviously with Mr. Brightside, it's more of a later on in the game kind of environment where you probably need your team to be winning for it really to have the effect that it does. But with Seven Nation Army, pretty well at the start of a match, at the start of a game, there's nothing that beats just that energy of knowing, okay, it's about to go down.
Absolutely. Nathan, thank you so much for this, indulging me in another head-to-head. Well argued, well fought. I think we stood toe-to-toe. We matched blow for blow. Again, I'm thinking we're going to have to call this one a draw. But that is it for Parasport Nation. Thank you, as always, for tuning in, watching, listening. We'll catch up with you next time.
Thanks for tuning in to Parasport Nation. Like and subscribe to the channel to follow us now.